Some of the most magnificent public gardens and parks in the world today were originally created for the private pleasures of their owners, who were often passionate and skillful gardeners. Mount Vernon, the home of George Washington, the first president of the United States, the founder of the nation, and one of the great gardeners of his time. Among the never-failing joys of George Washington's private life were his gardens. The planting, arrangement, and care of his trees, vegetables, and flowers filled his life with constant satisfaction, which he so fully expressed when after the Revolution he wrote, "The more I am acquainted with agricultural affairs, the better I am pleased with them. I am led to reflect how much more delightful to an undebauched mind is the task of making improvements on the earth than all the vain glory which can be acquired from ravaging it."
The lower or kitchen garden reveals as much about its owner as the sweeping panoramas he planted along the Potomac River. For here, the same patience and precision that sustained him in war provided food for his table in peace. Born a country gentleman from a prominent family, Washington turned this plantation scheme into one of America's great gardens. An expression of his preference for botany over battle, Mount Vernon provides a keen impression of Washington's taste and times. The President personally directed the raising or testing of 60 different crops, as well as the design of an estate that reflected both the dignity and practicality of his nature. Worksheets prepared by his gardeners for their weekly reports to Washington still survive, revealing a commander's attention to battlefield detail, where nature is the enemy. Droughts, freezes, and ice storms forced him to plant and replant the same vegetables and fruit trees many times. Undaunted by weather, as well as by affairs of state and revolutionary wars, Washington continued to relay instructions to his gardeners, whether from a campaign tent in Valley Forge or from the presidential office in Philadelphia. It was Washington's pride to consider himself America's foremost farmer. No doubt he agreed with his neighbor, Thomas Jefferson, who believed that those who labor in the earth are the chosen people of God. Seen from a distance, the estate suggests a small colonial village. Martha Washington was insistent that the ground should provide everything necessary in a housekeeping way. Her days here were filled with the sounds of blacksmith, carpenter, and gardener. Providing all the comforts of a contemporary village, Mount Vernon was self-sustaining. Though the term did not yet exist, George Washington was his own landscape architect. During the 45 years of his tenure, the size of Mount Vernon increased from 2 to 8,000 acres.
George Washington, horticulturist and gardener, had a special love for trees. These trees were planted in Washington's time and are still flourishing 2 centuries later. Imagine producing such beauty for 200 years. Here on the bowling green at Mount Vernon, he planted pairs of trees on either side of the expanse of grass. magnolias, linden, ash, holly, black gum, the tulip poplar, elm, maple, and aspen. I shall begrudge no reasonable expense, he wrote, that will contribute to see them in good order, and everything trim, handsome, and thriving about them. For nothing hurts me more than to find them otherwise. It was Washington's determination to design and create gardens and grounds not only as the center for his family life, but also to entertain the many friends, dignitaries, and visitors to the new country. It was his express wish that his beloved Mount Vernon would one day belong to the people.
Today, more than 1 million people a year enjoy this vibrant testimony to Washington's life through the efforts of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, which acquired the property in 1853, just a century after Washington arrived. Their stewardship is the guiding hand for faithful restorations and diligent efforts that preserve the accomplishments of our founding father. The beauty of expression found in this public garden today breathes the air of its creator. Washington wrote constantly to friends and acquaintances, asking them to send him parings and seeds from around the world. In 1785, he began construction of the greenhouse, or orangery, so that the more sensitive plants and trees he acquired could survive. These included palmetto from South Carolina, mahogany from the West Indies, as well as an exotic forest of lemon, orange, lime, aloe, and rubber trees, none of which could have endured a single Virginia winter out of doors. Washington the Commander is everywhere evident in the gardens of Mount Vernon. Never given to rash or reckless impulse in battle, he prevailed through careful planning and the sheer force of a character that was marked by an inexhaustible capacity to persevere. A public showcase for a private personality, Washington's garden was famous in its time. In 1798, a European visitor marveled at the general's ability to create an old-world beauty, writing that, "In the evening, Washington showed us around his garden. It is well cultivated, perfectly kept, and is quite in English style. All the vegetables indispensable for the kitchen were found there. The whole plantation, the garden, and the rest prove well that a man born with natural taste may guess at beauty without having ever seen its model." Though Europe embraced the wealth of new plants from America, the typical American gardens mostly still favored common flowers from the Old World. Washington's writings contain references to such flowers as crown imperials, tulips, wild sweet williams, and cardinals. The English and French flowers that he imported for his garden were meant to make foreign visitors feel at home. The pleasures of his flower garden still provide a potpourri of 18th century floral effects. If Washington himself couldn't have planted it, you will not see it blossoming here.
And today, unchanged, 200 years later, its simplicity, its freedom from pretense, make it an appealing vision of youth and loveliness. Not striving for attention, it attains the ideal of a garden which was made to satisfy mind and heart.
At Mount Vernon, we find a surveyor's eye in the landscape and a presidential majesty in the vistas. Washington's choice of Pierre l'Enfant to design the new American capital that would bear his name acknowledged the ascendance of the French formal style. And nowhere did that style find such eloquent and diverse expression as in the public gardens of Paris. In the 1620s, at the same time the pilgrims were landing on Plymouth Rock, the Jardin des Plantes was established in Paris. Begun for medicinal purposes by the physician to Louis XIII, this formal arrangement began as a collection of valuable herbs and botanical specimens. It was the first of many gardens meant to improve the quality of health and welfare in an urban environment.
Of all the parks in Paris, the Jardin de Luxembourg is the most successful in joining the pleasures of park and garden on a human scale. It is a 60-acre sanctuary where one is encouraged to loiter in nature. Here, flowers, water and trees form an urban retreat, an escape from a city where congestion has reached the limits of the absurd.
Begun in 1612 for Marie de Medici, Queen of France, the Luxembourg has endured the dramatic metamorphosis characteristic of so many French public gardens, reflecting the rise and fall of royal as well as political fashions. Marie, inspired by the Beaubelay Gardens of Florence where she had lived as a child, commissioned formal designs that included parterres embroidered with her monogram. These kind of aristocratic whims were cut short by the French Revolution, when the jardin became the property of the people. Over the course of 4 centuries, Parisians have continued to have a proprietary feeling about this special place. When in the mid-19th century, Georges Haussmann, known as the creator of modern Paris, proposed radical changes to the garden, a mob 12,000 strong rose in protest. They squashed his plans and managed to preserve the most public of Parisian parks.
The garden's atmosphere is charged with the personalities of its inhabitants, who keep thousands of garden chairs on the move in search of sun, shade, and nourishment of the senses. A public park full of private spaces, it is designed to accommodate the individual. At the turn of the century, Isadora Duncan used to dance here at dawn. Today it is still a haven for lovers, thinkers, walkers, chess players, and most especially children.
The public parks are alive in more than a literal sense. More than playgrounds, they are part of the Parisians' home and birthright. Do they think of royalty? Does it ever occur to them that the park they so enjoy was once the property of kings and queens, who first commissioned the orchards that still thrive in the far reaches of the garden? Each individual apple or pear is wrapped in its own paper bag to protect it from insects and birds until the fruit is ripe. The philosophical inspiration of these gardens can be traced back to the 16th century. When the French essayist Montaigne visited the early Renaissance pleasure gardens of Italy, he wrote, "These are beauties that are open to anyone who likes them, who may sleep in them and even take his friends." This democratic sentiment is also reflected in an inscription at the Villa Borghese, dating back to 1620. It welcomed visitors with the promise that, whoever thou art, now be a free man. Go where thou wilt, pluck what thou wilt. Here all is for the stranger, more than for the one who owns.
In the 1600s, the finance minister of Louis XIV ordered the planting of elms to line the roads approaching Paris. But as the city expanded, the view of trees and countryside disappeared. By the 19th century, Paris was choked with expansion. In one of the first great programs of urban renewal, trees were imported from the countryside to line the streets and squares of Paris. Around the world, as cities grew and the space for gardens disappeared, the tree assumed a crucial role to help the urban dweller maintain a vital link with nature.
In order to bring relief to the most densely populated sections of Paris, Napoleon III established more than 70 pocket parks. Here, in the Square René Viviani, the oldest living tree in the city is testament to the greening of Paris. Pocket parks are modelled loosely on the privately maintained parks and squares that the Emperor Napoleon III had seen in London. They are characterized by borders of evergreen shrubs around a few specimen trees, and have more than doubled in number since the mid-19th century. Napoleon III gave the Bois de Boulogne to the city in one of his first acts as emperor. Once again, the current of one person's thought would ripple into the fabric of a city's life through its public gardens. Georges Haussmann had the foresight to appoint Jean-Claude Alphand to the task of revitalizing the former royal forest. Bois de Boulogne may be Napoleon III's grandest attempt to evoke public awe. This 2,000-acre park became a favorite place for fashionable promenades and romantic assignations. More than 60 miles of diverse plantings, winding lanes, bridle paths, lakes, and cascades provide pleasure at its most Parisian. The shade of more than 200,000 oaks, elms, black pine, and hemlock provide the leafy magic that makes urban dwelling tolerable. Parc Monceau was first laid out on a dry, barren site northwest of Paris in 1773. Like so many other former private pleasure grounds, it became public property after the Revolution, and was further transformed as part of Napoleon III's grandiose schemes. Perhaps most noteworthy to contemporary concerns, this greening of Paris took place entirely within existing city boundaries. The individuality of trees played a major role in these newly conceived compositions. No longer created as the geometric outgrowth of formal designs, their habits were allowed natural expression, which in turn encouraged the flourishing of natural emotion. It is no coincidence that in France, courtship is inextricably linked to the park. The great achievement of the public garden in France is that, in sheltering the masses, it celebrates the individual. Just as no two people are alike, the same is true of trees. And just as the age of a tree can be discerned in its rings, so the tenor of an age can be discerned in the way it preserves and cultivates. After all, even in the Bible, wisdom made its first appearance in the shape of a tree. What does he plant who plants a tree? He plants the friend of sun and sky. He plants the flag of breezes free, the shaft of beauty towering high. He plants a home to heaven and I, for song and mother croon of bird in hushed and happy twilight heard. The treble of heaven's harmony, these things he plants, who plants a tree.
There is no greater plea for the preservation of our beautiful, fragile planet than the tribute to trees, to nature, made by 14-year-old Anne Frank in her diary just months before she died. I wonder if it's because I haven't been able to poke my nose outside for so long that I've become so crazy for everything to do with nature. Nearly every morning I go to the attic, and from my favorite spot on the floor, I look up at the blue sky and the bare chestnut tree, on whose branches little raindrops glisten like silver, and at the seagulls as they glide on the wind. As long as this exists, and I may live to see it, this sunshine, these cloudless skies, while this lasts, I cannot be unhappy. The best remedy for those who are afraid, lonely, or unhappy is to go outside. Somewhere they can be quiet, alone with the heavens, nature, and God. Because only then does one feel that all is as it should be, and that God wishes to see people happy amidst the simple beauty of nature. As long as this exists, and it certainly always will, I know there will always be comfort for every sorrow. And I firmly believe that nature brings solace in all troubles.